Hello, in this week's programme we look at computer security. And crack the code on this disc and you could win £8,000 worth of prizes.
Join me for a look at some of the winning entries from last night's 1985 Computer Animation Film Festival.
For the home micro enthusiast, we look at upgrading from cassette to disc. Most home micros start out by using cassette for storing and loading programs. Well, cassette tapes are cheap and readily available. The trouble is they're very slow. You see, cassettes were never designed for storing computer data. They were originally intended for taping dictation. So cassettes are a compromise. And that's why more and more home micros are now being offered with discs, because apart from being faster, they offer all kinds of other facilities. Here's the very popular Amstrad, and this is the disk drive unit itself here, and inside, there's the disc. Now, discs come in other sizes than that. That's a 3-inch. Here we've got a 3.5. This is 5 1/4, and here you see why they're called floppy disks. And this one, an 8-inch, which nobody seems to use these days. So what do discs offer? Well, for one thing, every disc has a built-in catalogue or directory of all the programs stored on it. So all I need to do is type in *cat, and there we are. I get a complete list of all the programs on the disc. Now, you could do the same thing with a 60-minute tape, but of course it'll take you 60 minutes. Now then, that's the program I want. It's called Graphic, so I just type in load, Graphic. I'm not the world's best typist, but that's all there is to it. It's ready to run. How does that work? Well, inside the sleeve is, logically enough, a disc. Now, if I get rid of that sleeve, the disc itself is organised into tracks, going round, and sectors, radiating out. When I load a program from the disc, it starts spinning. There's a read-write head, which is actually part of the disk drive, which moves in to read the directory. Now, on this disk, the directory is stored on the edge, and there the head finds where the program is. That is, it finds the track and sector number of the start of the program. It then moves in and starts to load up. Well, it sounds complicated, but all you need to know is type in load, and the rest is done very, very quickly. But disk also gives other advantages too. For instance, you can delete files, you can copy them, rename them, all very, very simply. Well, so far, so good. We've seen how this particular micro uses this particular type of 5 1/4-inch disc. But like everything in this business, it's every man for himself. As we've seen, there are other sizes, but the problem is more subtle than that. You see, there are many different ways of using this same size disc. When you buy a disc, it's got no information on it. It's just like a blank sheet of paper. So the first thing you have to do is format those tracks and sectors onto it. Well, that's very much like ruling lines on the sheet of paper. How many lines? Well, that depends on your system. Many systems use 40 track, but obviously you'll get more information packed in if you use 80 track. Of course, if you can write on both sides of the disc, you'll get even more information in. But of course, that needs 2 heads, one underneath, so that'll cost you. Now, that's called a double-sided disc, which is not to be confused with double density. Double density means packing the data in tighter, writing in smaller print on that piece of paper, if you like. So, out of that little lot, which one do you choose? Well, as often as not, the choice is made for you. There's absolutely no point in buying an 80-track drive if all the commercial software you want to run is supplied on 40-track. So it's worth finding out what's the standard for your system. And just about every home micro there is lets you upgrade to disk. Even the Spectrum here, with its micro drives, has attracted floppy disk interfaces. This one here is called the Beta Plus, and it costs about £95. It hooks your Spectrum up to a disk drive, which itself will cost another £100 or so. Well, most games cassettes take about 4 or 5 minutes to load. In fact, that one over there, Attic Attack, is still loading. But with this disk interface, it's as quick as this. Just enter a few commands, press the enter button, and Bob's your uncle. Once you're hooked on the speed of discs, you'll never want to use cassettes again. And of course, what you'll then want to do is put all your cassettes onto disk. But that might not be so easy. You see, there are 2 main problems. The first is that all disk systems grab some memory for their own use, so your programs have less room to run in, and it might not be enough. The second problem is that a lot of your commercial software is copy protected, so unless you really know what you're doing, you're not going to be able to transfer it. You'll need to trade in all those old cassettes for disk versions, if they're available. Most software houses we've spoken to will make that swap for about half the price of the disk version. But that could prove expensive. And of course, if you've got a Spectrum, there won't be a disk version to swap to. The system we've got here gets around that problem by taking what's called a snapshot of the entire contents of memory and saving that onto disk. If I just press this button here, it saves everything. It dumps the entire memory, not just the screen, but the whole program. Now that's a very, very neat system, very easy to use. But software houses don't like it. They think it's a pirate's dream. Although, of course, making a single backup copy of your own software for your own use shouldn't cause any problems. None of the copy protection mechanisms that the software houses have come up with can defeat a system like that. Well, not this week, anyway.
The Advertising Standards Authority named the computer companies whose ads are not legal, decent, honest and truthful. BT and Mercury are told to stop squabbling and start connecting. And Britain does well in this year's Computer Graphics Film Festival. In a report just published, the Advertising Standards Authority has upheld complaints against 6 information technology companies. The companies which failed to meet the authority's code of legal, decent, honest and truthful advertising were Electronic Whip Computer Systems, Owl Software, Raquel Vodafone, Sinclair Research, Solidist Technology, which had 3 complaints upheld against it, and software games company US Gold. High-tech communications company Mercury has won a small victory in its long-running struggle to compete with British Telecom. Professor Brian Carlsberg, Director General of the Office of Telecommunications Oftel, has ruled that by March the 30th next year, BT must allow Mercury to connect to the existing telephone network. This follows long drawn-out negotiations between the 2 companies after the signing of an initial agreement in 1982. Carlsberg stepped in because, in the words of the Oftel document, after a period which appears to the Director General to be reasonable for the purpose, BT has failed to enter into an agreement as required by Mercury. IBM released its third quarter results this week and reported a drop of 7% on earnings. The company blames a hesitation in orders for the new 3090 mainframe in the US and the fall on the value of the dollar. The figures are being seen as a further indication that the industry is still suffering from a slump. American chip manufacturer Intel has announced a new microprocessor which could produce a new generation of micros, as Wendy Woods reports from California.
At a time when virtually all American semiconductor manufacturers are suffering through their worst year in history, some good news has appeared this week from Intel. Intel introduced a 32-bit microprocessor twice as powerful as the chip that drives the IBM PC. The 80386 can access 4 billion bits of information and will be the brains of the next generation of micros. This is Wendy Woods reporting for Micro Live in Silicon Valley.
And finally, here's some good news. Britain won 3 of the 8 categories in last night's Computer Animation Film Festival in London. British entries took the top award in the commercials, TV graphics and the pop promo sections. I was there, and later in the programme, I'll be showing you some of the films you just won't believe.
Army communications in the field need to be mobile. Obviously, they have to keep up with movements in the battlefield. A signals convoy like this one can act as a relay post between units at different positions. We're on the move now to make sure that when they get to their site, there's a decent communications link set up, ready and waiting for them. This vehicle has on board a transmitter which will form part of a widespread communications network, and it's got to be installed and online as soon as possible. The crucial thing is to make sure that the signal sent from the top of this aerial can be picked up by headquarters, which might be anything up to 20 miles away. The problem is compounded by any hills in the way which might interfere with the signal. You've got to be sure you'll get a satisfactory reception before you set up the communications post. So I went to ask Yeoman of Signals Palmer how this is normally calculated.
I've got to do what we call a path profile, where I've actually got to draw a graph of the terrain between where we are and where we are working to.
A sort of cross-section through the earth?
Yes.
How'd you do that?
Well, what we have to actually do is look at the contour lines on the map and actually plot the height of each contour line for the whole shot.
There are dozens of them.
Absolutely.
How long is that going to take?
Well, this particular bit will probably take me 15 minutes at least to do.
Right. Oh, well, let's assume you've done that. I mean, what do you do next?
Then I've got to transfer to a proper drawing on special paper so that we can actually look at it.
I see. What does that look like?
Well, when it's finished, it will look something like this. As I said, we've used special paper, and this is where we are now. This is where we are transmitting to. And this is the actual radio line of sight between the transmitter and the receiver. And as you can see, it cuts through this peak here, which will be an obstruction, and therefore will cause the signal to suffer.
Now, so far you've only drawn, you haven't done any computation. What do you do now with that?
Well, once I've got this, I now have to go to a book of what we call nonograms and work out various losses, such as for free space and reflection. We work it out from this particular nonogram here and tell us roughly how many dB losses we're going to suffer.
Obviously a very lengthy, painstaking process. How long did it take?
Well, this has taken about 45 minutes, but these are ideal conditions. Can you imagine in the middle of the night in a tent, pouring with rain? Rather difficult.
And then what happens if you find that it's not a suitable site?
Well, then we've got to pick another location and start all over again.
You'd be well pleased. Surely a job tailor-made for a computer, especially if it can be preloaded with information about land contours. And this is the computer that the Army's found for the job. It's the Husky Hunter. It's very light, portable, but it's very, very tough. Tough enough to take a few knocks, which it would need to in the field. Despite its size, it's got enough memory here to hold all the geographical details for an area of, 2,000 square miles. It's not exactly an expert system. You need training to use it, but if I simply enter the coordinates of each end of the link and a few other details such as mast height and the frequency, I can just let the computer get on with it. There's a few seconds delay. And here's that profile. There, of course, is the hill that could cause the problems. And there is the path of our signal. The computer can now get on with calculating the signal loss. And shortly it will come up with a number, which is the number of decibels loss on the signal. Now, I'm hoping that number will be less than 150. That's as much as we can cope with. 150 decibels means that the signal at this end is about 1,000 millionth of the signal we're transmitting. But that's enough to cope with. Here's the number, 133, and that's okay. It's all very well setting up an elaborate network of communication links, but if this were for real and not an exercise here in South Dorset, then simply communicating wouldn't be the aim. In wartime, communications must be intelligible to us, but unintelligible to the other side. A lot of radio telephone messages there. Now, the enemy's bound to pick it up.
Well, no. The telephone conversations themselves are not in analogue form as currently used on the British telephone system. In fact, the Ptarmigan system is wholly digital, and that means as well as normal voice traffic, we have data and telegraph. Because it's in digital format, then the messages can be encrypted very easily. Consequently, subscriber's voice is changed from analogue to digital form at his telephone instrument. And thereafter, as it's routed through the system, it can be scrambled or encrypted before being passed along the transmission links.
What's the difference then between encryption and the old-time scrambling that you hear about?
There is very little difference except in terms of the quality of the security offered by a digital encryption system.
Why is that more secure?
Sorry.
Well, the Army are obviously not very keen to be drawn on that one. In the business world, the stakes may be different, but the need for secure data is just as high. Increasingly, the micros used in business are linked and communicating to each other. A cluster of workstation in one building might be linked together via a departmental computer by what's known as a local area network. And there may be several of these in different parts of the country, perhaps linked to the mainframe by telephone lines. All this means that Joe Bloggs in Birmingham could link it to my personal documents in London. Well, to stop him from doing this, a very basic protection is to ask for a password. And we've got two micros here which are connected together, and I want to get information which is stored in this one out on this micro over here. Well, first it asks me to sign on, and I give it my username, which is obviously Mac, and it goes away and checks that, and then it says, please enter your password. Well, to any reasonable hacker, he would obviously try Mac. and that's obviously one that you shouldn't use. And it says, please enter your password. It obviously doesn't like it, and so my password is in fact a secret. So I'll type in secret. With a bit of luck, it should accept that, and immediately it does. It starts to transship the information from here to this one over here through the wire. But so passwords offer some form of protection, but one problem is that data can be intercepted as it's travelling along the wire connecting the two together. It's possible to bug the wires, there may be telephone wires for example, and to suck out the data without needing a password or even to be there. Somewhere in the building there'll be a spaghetti junction like this that could be tapped into.
What we have here is a small FM wireless microphone. This microphone is designed to pick up voice and transmit it over short distances to a standard VHF receiver, an FM broadcast receiver, such as this receiver here. Now what we have done is we have deliberately tapped the phone line using a transmitter like this one, modified slightly, and that is now transmitting a signal which can be picked up on this VHF receiver. Now let's see what happens when we turn on this VHF receiver and pick up the sound being transmitted by our wireless transmitter. The sound you hear is the sound of data being transmitted. Let's see what happens when we bring it by the terminal.
So there he has a copy of what could be a secret memo. You might not be able to stop the phone tappers, but you can stop them making sense of your data. One way is to use black boxes called scramblers. This is one here. It's actually a blue box, but it fulfills the same function. They sit on either end, there's another one over here, of the telephone line between one machine and the other. One alters the data in a predetermined way, and the other one reverses the effect. So if the message is intercepted, and we've got a message being transmitted between the two, and if it's intercepted by another micro here which hasn't got a scrambler, it just produces a lot of gibberish. In fact, you can see it's producing a lot of blanks on the screen, and that's because it's transmitting data which can't be actually converted into printable characters. Well, scramblers only give you security over the line, and there's still the problem that someone may get hold of the terminal and read your information. That's why the Army don't consider them a complete solution. A better answer is a software answer, data encryption. Well, it's very simplest. The words can be coded by shifting the letters of the alphabet like this. And there we have the alphabet, and we're going to shift them. Many of us have done this at school. We take an A and make it a Z and so on and so forth. And we've got a message here which we're going to convert using this lookup table. The T is converted into an O, the H is converted into a C, and the E is converted into a space, and so on, and you get some sort of gibberish coming out rather like this. Well, the trouble is that this code can be cracked with a rather simple computer program like this. There is our message, our final coded message there, and in fact there are only 27 different combinations that this can have, 26 letters of the alphabet and one space, and it's fairly straightforward to actually get the number of the possible combination from lookup table to 27 lookup tables like this. And all we have to do is to go through these 27 possible combinations and find one that's actually in English. And there it is. The money is hidden in the cellar. Well, that's a simple decoding program to write, and it's probably the first thing that any hacker would actually try. So instead of displacing the alphabet, what we can do is actually do a random shuffle like this, just shuffling the letters along. And then we get another lookup table here. There's the message, and once again we get this form of gibberish here. But this time, instead of 27 possibilities, there are 10,000 million of them. And to go through all these permutations in a mindless way on a computer would take more than 350 million years, even at 1 million lookup tables a second, and that's a lot of millions. But language is full of patterns, and earlier decoding techniques use these as a guide. If we look at this scrambled message here and look at the most common letter, it is in fact a U, which corresponds to this space. But the next most common is an R, which corresponds to the E, which is in fact the most common letter in the English alphabet. And by looking at the various combinations of letters here and the frequency, we can reduce the problem to something more manageable, and with a bit of luck and a bit of guesswork we can actually find what the message is. But to make things even more difficult for the cracker, there's a third technique. We can actually jumble the letters up here before they're actually converted by the lookup table. Take the lookup table and convert it, we get the usual gibberish. Now, if the cracker knows your lookup table, he can use it, and he gets a message here, which it's not quite obvious that that is actually English. Well, just how good are you at cracking this sort of code? In this week's Listener, there's a simple encryption puzzle for you to get your teeth into. You could solve the problem with paper and pencil and a lot of patience, but a computer would be a big help. The price for the first correct answer is an Amstrad word processing system. But the business encryption is not as easy as that. There are many other techniques which you can use to make the cracker's task even more difficult. One is to convert the code into binary combinations for which there is no printable characters, like we saw over there. Well, here's one professional communications software package which includes a data encryption facility. It's Datasoft's DataTalk. Well, Datasoft and their distributors Thorny and I reckon you stand little chance of cracking anything that's been encrypted by it, and they've put up a challenge. Well, this challenge appears in next week's Listener. The prizes are worth over £2,000 in the first week, and week by week they rise in value, so that if you won in the last week of the competition, they're worth £8,000. Datasoft are quite certain you won't do it. It's all numbers if you look at it here, so analysing the frequencies may not get you too far. You've got until our last show this year to crack it. Details are in the Listener. We'll keep you posted.
Called Tom's Gears, that mind-bending piece was the winner in the Fine Arts category at last night's Computer Animation Film Festival. One of the judges was from Middlesex Polytechnic. He was John Vince, and John is with me now in the studio. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us. I think we should get straight on and look at some of the award winners. And there's absolutely nothing partisan about showing British this evening because we did so well. So let's start with the winner in the pop promo section. This is going to be Dire Straits, and it comes from a British company called Rush's Post-Production.
Yes, this one's very good. We're just seeing what is called a real-time image floating through the screen there. But
was that the little sort of cartoony
little puppet,
figures, if I dare call them that?
That was done on a Bosch FGS system.
Why real-time? What does that expression imply?
It speeds up the process of getting the final animation. Here we're just seeing some paintbox images superimposed on live action.
So using a real-time system, you can actually capture images as they're happening?
Yes.
Providing they're simple enough, I
If they're
suppose.
simple and normally in wireframe.
Yes.
Some systems, like the Bosch, can do the colouring as well in real time.
Those were actually rather angular, I thought.
Yes, just to keep the model simple and keep the speed up.
Right, OK. Right, let's move on to another category, slightly different category this time. Winner of the commercial category. This is again from Britain. It's Robinson Lambinerns and Electronic Arts Get Smarties. Very, very jolly, isn't
Yes,
it?
now when I first saw this, I just didn't believe, well, I couldn't understand how it was achieved, but it is a computer, beautiful modelling, beautiful animation. I mean, look at that model there.
Nothing but a computer could actually create these images.
No, it would take a lifetime, it seemed, to do that, yes.
That in itself is its own justification, isn't it? Well, I think we'll move on now and see something slightly different. In fact, this wasn't an award winner, but a favourite of yours, I know, and it did vie for first place for the Supreme Award. This comes from Moving Picture Company. It's called Picture Gallery.
Yes, this one's got some beautiful effects, some video effects, Quantel Mirage, Quantel Paintbox, and the Bosch again. But one of the outstanding features of the animation is the use of motion control, where a camera is in charge of a computer, I should say, is in charge of the camera moving through a model. And it's the model that makes up the picture gallery.
We've got some real action there,
here
real
we're
life
seeing
there.
live action as well.
That lady
Now-
wasn't real, was she?
No. But here we are inside the model, and the computer is controlling that movement. And all of these other images are superimposed afterwards.
And where do those images come from? Do they come out?
Well, the cubes, you see the cube
Yes.
here, that is a Bosch image, and that could be shown in real time.
That is absolutely, it is tremendous,
is,
especially
yeah.
as you start to explain it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Do you
yeah.
think that computer-assisted visuals will eventually replace the traditional way that animators work altogether?
I don't think so, and I wouldn't want to see it either, no.
So do you think that there is a place for both?
They are going to coexist for a long time, yes.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I'm sure there are many traditionalists who hope so too, because they do say, traditional illustrators, that computer-generated images might be very clever, but they lack sensitivity and they lack personal expression, I think you'd call it. But frankly, this year's overall winner of the competition defies that criticism. From Canada, it's a little piece called Tony de Peltry. Let's have a look at that.
Yes, now this piece is really outstanding, and I suppose the purists would say that this is pure computer graphics. Everything is drawn by the computer. Fantastic modelling. We saw the model of the shoe just then. Now that is not a real shoe, but a computer-generated shoe.
Now, what exactly do you mean by that? I mean, that's a staggering statement to make.
Someone has to feed in the dimensions of the shoe, in that someone has had to feed in the dimensions of this model that we're seeing now. Every aspect of that model has to be fed in numerically.
So, you're saying that the model itself doesn't actually exist? There isn't a puppet-type figure who's being moved about?
Well, there would have been a shoe in the first place, and there would have been a model of the head in the first place, but that is digitised and turned into triangles, and then it's the triangles that make up the final model.
Is this rather like the picture that is on our screen at the moment?
Yes, now we can see how that model is going to be turned into a system of triangles and polygons, and afterwards that model can be thrown away. It's the numbers that remain that are animated.
So you're actually talking about turning numbers, the measurements between one little point and another. You tell the computer that, and the computer can then judge for itself how all those numbers move about.
Under the control of a program, yes.
Absolutely. So therefore that makes the lights and the shadows from the figures, none of those are real either.
Everything, yes. Everything.
That is extraordinary. Now that must have been a supercomputer that created that.
Yes, there were 2 cyber mainframe computers involved in the project, a total of 3 years and 4 man-years involved in achieving that animation.
Yeah, and the animation lasts about 5 minutes, but
yes,
I would like to say I think it's worth every moment of it. Is there anywhere else that interested people can see this year's winners?
Yes, I'm hoping to show a lot of these excerpts at the Cambridge Animation Festival in November, 4th to the 10th of November, so get along there and see it.
Smashing. John, thanks very much for coming along this evening. The pictures are even more amazing once you understand a little about how they're created.
Yes.
Wow, it's very, very sad. But it's like a wave. Woo! You're being crazy or what? Let's go, everyone!
Next week's MicroLive departs from its usual format. The entire programme is devoted to one subject: how computers are influencing the output of real musicians. Take it away, Tony. Night-night.
Remembering the unforgettable, a certain truth dresses as a fable.